Well, I've got time. Y'all may or may not have the same numbers, but I'm Buster Jones, and I facilitate the Reflections program this year. I want to thank you for participating in this latter phase of our summer series. We have these every month on the third Friday, and the rest of the year's lined up, so there'll be some good programs out ahead of you. A little housekeeping chore: if during my talk or Stan's talk you can't hear, raise your hand or throw a projectile or something to get the man's attention, and he will accommodate you. I got a question for you. What's $1 trillion look like? Do you have? No, I'm serious. I think most of you can relate to 1,000, or maybe even $1 million. $1 trillion is a one with 12 zeros. That's just beyond me. But if you watch any news at all, you know that over the last weeks there's been a battle between the parties about an infrastructure bill that will, of course, help the broad spectrum of infrastructure for almost anything you can think about. And those values run anywhere from, I think the current one's $550 billion, and you can buy a lot of cars for that. And the one that the administration is proposing is at least like $1 trillion, one with 12 zeros. Well, that's great, because we all know and have watched over our lifetimes our infrastructure deteriorate, and we know it needs help. In Virginia, and particularly roads and bridges, and what I think in both of the bills before our federal government, about 40% of the infrastructure funds that you see on the headline will be going to roads and bridges. Well, yay, we need it without a doubt. But the question, if you get closer to home, is how much of that money is going to get to Virginia? How much of that money is going to get to I-81 widening? And once it's all in a big pot, how does it get allocated? How does it get out to the states? Is it a set formula, or does it require the lobbyists to go in and fight for your piece of the money? I'm going to leave those questions with you, because Stan is in a position to firsthand experience address some of that. Each of you all have had in your business or your associations one individual who really made a difference. Well, my career was in highway heavy work. As you probably may remember, I spent many years building in Virginia. The state and the national organizations that represented our industry, and still do, were the Virginia Road Builders Association and the American Road and Transportation Builders Association, ARTBA. It is extremely active to this day. One individual, and over some years when he was going full steam in business, that made a significant difference to our industry right here was our fellow resident, Stan Lanford. Now, Stan was raised in our neck of the woods. He got a civil engineer degree from UVA, as some of y'all would like me to say that. and he ran the family business, Lanford Brothers Construction, which was a multi-generational effort. Stan was more than our representative for Virginia Road Builders, more than just a representative for the American Road and Transportation Builders across 50 states. He was our national president, and as such was indeed an icon for our industry. It's my sincere pleasure to have Stan share his reflections.
As you noticed, if you speak, you get to take your mask off, so I'll have my mask off while I'm speaking. And after that introduction, I'm not sure I can follow it with anything worthwhile. That's a pretty high limb for me to climb down from, Buster, but I appreciate it. And I want to tell you some stories, and I put up here about hard work. Like, hard work is something everybody knows is important. But what I found was that hard work combined with a good brain and making a lot of effort to try to not make mistakes, get you a lot further than people who are lazy. And there are lots of lazy people out here, and all of us are lazy about something. But anyway, we're going to try to keep you entertained here for a few minutes and talk about different things that have happened. I'm going to start back in the early 1900s and talk about how some of my people got started in construction work. That it's been a family affair with us for four generations now. So with that, this is what they were using to move dirt with back in 1910. This is a railroad shovel. If you look at it closely, you'll see that it's running on a railroad track, and that track could be lifted up. What was behind them, they could pick it up and bring it out in front, so they kept just moving the same 2 pieces or 4 pieces of track for the crane to run on. If you also notice, there's 6 people operating this machine, and my uncle, Lit Coleman, was the man on the crane. He was called a craneman, and he actually controlled the crowding of the bucket into the dirt so it would get enough rock and get enough pressure to pick it up. And then another operator sat in the seat down on the left side, and he could swing the front of the machine, swung back and forth, and it was loaded onto railroad dump cars that would then haul it to the field where it would be dumped, and started the foundation and came up as a field so they could build a road that had a uniform grade on it. So that was the first one in our family that wanted to be a contractor, and he became one in 1925. But before that time, my dad had worked in construction since he was about 15. He was a farm boy down in Louisa County, Virginia. And the farmers, as you might know, if you worked on a farm, you usually only got paid when your crop was harvested and you sold it, which meant that you did not have a lot of cash most of the year. When you'd get flush, maybe when you got your corn or tobacco or wheat or whatever you had to sell. But if you if you ran out of money, you had to go to the bank and try to borrow it, and then you ended up losing your farm, which happened to my grandfather. He lost it during the Depression. He lost his little 50-acre farm because he couldn't pay his bank loan off when he tried to buy the property. But my father's father never worked on construction work, but because Uncle Lit was the brother of my grandmother Lanford, these 2 of her children were partial to construction. Actually, 3 of them got to construction work. So it's interesting how in families, once the older brother would go out to West Virginia and get a good job, then somebody else in the family would want to go too. And they liked the idea of getting paid every week, every month, or the cash was coming fairly regularly once you worked on construction work. Now I'm going to move on. This is a picture of my father in 1925. He was 20 years old, He's smoking a cigarette that ultimately killed him, stomach cancer. But anyway, he was a handsome dude, and he liked the shovel operator. He worked at it most of his life. Even when he was owner, he was still the operator of the shovel. And in the road construction business, the shovel was a key to the amount of production you got. If you had a project that had lots of yards of dirt and rock that had to be moved, then it helped to have a good shovel runner who could keep the shovel going smoothly and quickly and load lots of trucks or eighty wagons, different hauling devices. And it was kind of a key man in the production team. And I think Dad liked that position. The next one I'll show you. This is a steam shovel. This shovel was powered with a steam boiler. And if you look at it, you'll notice that there's this tall smokestack here in the back that is going to exit the smoke and exit out up above the top of the machine. There's also a rubber hose laying on the ground beside the machine. You had to have water supply, which meant probably it was a gravity. They found a spring somewhere up on the side of the hill. They could run the water down to the machine, but had to have water on a regular basis. And then they had to have coal to fire the boiler up and keep the steam up. So that was the best they had in the 1920s and considered on pretty much through the 20s. By the late 20s and early 30s, the gasoline engine had become popular for construction equipment, and it was very efficient, but compared to the steam engine, it was much more efficient. You only had to handle one fuel, and you could put a tank on the crane or the shovel, and it would carry 50 or 75 gallons, so you could run a whole shift, maybe 2 or 3 days on a tank of gas. Also, in 1925, my Uncle Lit and a man named Enrico Vasilio, who was an Italian immigrant who had come to this country in 1899 and had been building coke ovens in southwestern West Virginia for the coal companies. And he and Uncle Lit had worked together on a construction job with another contractor and had met each other and liked and approved of their methods of working. And so they decided to start their own company. They formed a corporation called Gilbert Construction Corporation. And this particular company stayed in business from 1925 to 1940. And the third partner that was helped him start Gilbert Construction Company was a guy named Dick Gay, and he was also a farm boy from down in Orange County, Virginia, and he was well educated. He'd gone to high school and actually gone to Fort Union Military Academy and got a postgraduate degree, so I think they hired him to be the bookkeeper and the guy that knew some things. So it was interesting. They were different personalities, but the three of them took that company and made a lot of money with it and did a lot of work, and they survived through the Depression with it. But by 1940, the world was changing again, and of course when World War II started, things became a lot different. Let me back up here a little. This picture shows my Uncle Lit, the second man from the left, and Dick Gay is a short guy in there. The farthest guy to the left is a state inspector. He may have had a little education, but I doubt he had a college degree. And the guy on the right was an equipment salesman. And equipment salesmen became part of the construction industry because they're the people that sold you those new cranes and shovels and trucks. And at that time, they were still using some mules and horses, so but the equipment salesmen were an important part of the industry, and they showed up frequently wanting you to buy something new, encouraging you to do that. This is a couple of pictures showing my dad in a shovel, running a shovel in Liss, Kentucky. And in this job, Dad was casting the dirt to the side, which was fairly easy production, but he was getting 1,000 cubic yards a day. At that time, there was hardly anybody ever got that kind of production. So he was very, very pleased with himself that he was able to do that. And these pictures were taken. He'd written on the back that he got $1,000 a day, 1,000 cubic yards of dirt moved each day for 10 days. That's 10,000 cubic yards. If you had $1 a yard, that's $10,000, which was a whole lot of money in 28, I think it was. So. Here's 3 more construction workers. The guy in the middle is my dad, and the guy on the left, it's almost bald-headed, is Ted Slater, who later became a partner with my dad. But they were all working for Gilbert Construction Company at the time. This picture here is another innovation. This shovel is a gas air, and with the gas air shovel, the gasoline engine powers the equipment, but it also had a small air pump on it that would make air pressure, and they used air pressure to help the clutches and brakes that you had on the machine lock and unlock easier. Originally, it was just a mechanical advantage. You had a lever up here you pushed, and there was a series of levers that went back to the drum that you were trying to control. With the air control on there, it made it a lot easier for the operator. He wasn't wearing out as fast. And that lasted for about 10 years, and then hydraulics came along and took the place of air. But and also by the 30s, we were looking at the first diesel engines were starting to come into use. Diesel engines were very efficient. They burned less fuel in gallons a day. They really did make a big difference in getting the power it took to keep these machines working. Several pictures here. The one that I was really trying to show was the one that shows the shovel boom is kind of leaning over. What happened, the foot pin that the boom is connected to the main body of the machine broke. My dad was operating the machine, and the boom was, and the bucket, the whole operation just swung over into the side of the cab and squashed him into the so fortunately, he wasn't seriously injured. That it really could have caused a lot of serious trouble, but they survived. And you see, they had some cribbing there. They built the cribbing under the boom so they could get the boom back in place, and they found a new pin and reconnected. And again, that's kind of all in a week's work. Things broke, and you had to fix them, and you used the best way you could. Picture taken in 1934 is Albert Brothers Company, and I don't know if any of you ever knew that Charlie Albert in Salem. The Albert family was pretty famous around here. He actually put the money into Sherwood Cemetery and started that. But Mr. Albert and my dad worked for Mr. Albert for a while. This job was on the Parkway, and this may be the machine that my dad was running at that time. I was born in 1933, and they were up there in 1934 living there in Luray, Virginia. And so it's possible that this was a shovel my dad was on. I can't really see the operator well enough to tell, but Mr. Charlie Albert had a good company. They operated for over 40 years and did well. Of course, he passed away somewhere in the 60s, I think it was. Had a son that took over for him. The son bid a job down at Martinsville, Virginia, to do the bypass there on 220, and he bid it too cheap, and he went bankrupt. That was the end of the Albert Brothers. But that happens in construction work. It was not a everyday occurrence by any means, but there were some people, and I'll tell you another incident about somebody going bankrupt here in a few minutes. This company here is this company, this machine is owned by a man named Forrest Sammons, Sammons. I never knew him, but Buck Fowler ended up being a partner with him. Buck Fowler was operating out of Buckhannon and also had an office in Salem. And he built a lot of the interstate projects in Virginia over the years. And I never did know Mr. Sammons, but he had lots of partners. He had, Harold Robertson was the president of Colonial American Bank, had a brother that was a partner with with Buck Fowler. So all right, I'm moving ahead here a little bit. This was taken in 1954. That was a year that things had changed a lot with my dad and the company. Dick Gay had retired in 1953. He had some heart problems, and the business was changing. We had gotten through World War II. A lot had gone on there, but they needed some new things had to take place. So when the war broke out in 1941, highway construction pretty much stopped all over the United States. Almost all of the freight that was hauled in World War II was hauled on trains and railroads. So the railroads began to work on their system to try to make it more efficient. They changed the grades, they straightened the curves, they built wider and stronger bridges so they could handle the heavier loads they were bringing. And it was a time when the people who'd been bidding highway work, there was no work to bid. The states quit doing highway lettings for the most part. Very few contractors were able to get work working in railroads. So most of the ones that survived had gotten into working to build railroads. That happened to be a company from Charlottesville, which is close to Louisa County, where my dad was from. It had several people working for this company that were from Louisa County. It's called Haley, Chisholm, and Morris. They were an old-time railroad company that had started back in the 20s and were still going strong when World War II hit. And they had a contract in Washington to build a new railroad yard. There was so much material coming into Washington, they didn't have enough yard storage to handle the train load that was coming in daily. And so we filled in a swamp up there in 1942, close to the Pentagon, and developed a large piece of property that today is called Potomac City. It has a lot of subdivisions and then high-rise buildings and a couple of shopping centers, but it was a swamp to start with. It was filled in 1942 and 43. My dad was working up there, and I visited Washington a few times while in the 40s, 42 and 43, when he was there. They worked pretty much throughout the South during the World War II. They were in Virginia, West Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Kentucky, and Georgia. And they built, widened, and expanded railroads in all those states during that time. But by the early 50s, the railroads construction and highway construction both had slowed down. The interstate system hadn't gotten started yet, and there was a big demand for roads, and the states just didn't have the money to do anything with. And so one of these organizations that Buster mentioned is the American Road Builders and the Virginia Road Builders. The Virginia Road Builders didn't start till 1946, but they were started in order to try to lobby for more funding for road construction, transportation construction. And they did a pretty good job, but it wasn't getting the job done. And so by 1958, Congress had passed a law that set the interstate system up. And you may remember that we had some early jobs on the interstate up in near Buckhannon. LOL Tier was a North Carolina contractor, built the first interstate project on 81 here back in 1958. And I think they gave him 3 years to do the job, and he finished it in about a year and a half, which was typical. As people had got larger jobs, they bought bigger equipment and were able to do the work faster. But the interstate system began to change our industry tremendously because they put the extra gas tax on, and that gave us the funds to pave the way. When we started building the interstate, the average price was about $1 million a mile. And Jim worked with VDOT for many years, can tell you that they don't get very many miles for $1 million today. Anyway, these machines that are sitting here on this picture, they're called scrapers or pans. They're pulled with a crawler tractor. They have rubber-tired pans behind them, and the machines scrape up the dirt and haul it to the field and to build the low places, cut the high places off and fill in the low places. That summer, I was a grease monkey. I'd worked out there, and I was best paying job I had for many years. I think it was a union job, and I think I made $1.75 an hour, which was at the time when a lot of people were getting 50 cents and $1 an hour. So I was pretty happy that summer. In 1960, our dad had started a company with Dick Gay and Ted Slater called Lanford and Slater. And when Dick retired in 1953, and by 1960, Ted wasn't satisfied with being a partner with Jack and I, and he was a lot older than us and wasn't crazy about the risk that was involved in building roads. And our experience was not very encouraging to him. That when we were both just fresh out of college and really didn't know a lot of the practical things that you learn in life. Anyway, we managed to move along pretty good, but we lost Ted Slater, and Jack and I chartered a new company called Lanford Brothers, and that got us going in a little bit new direction because we had finally realized that we could not build did not have the dirt moving equipment and the capital to buy new equipment that we could continue to be competitive in that market. So we had converted ourselves into a concrete building company. We built bridges and box culverts, and that was the beginning of the real Lanford Brothers that's evolved now, and we've evolved again since then. But it was a good place for us to be at the time. We ended up getting some really good work during the interstate days. There was a tremendous number of concrete bridges and box culverts, and all kinds of concrete work was available. So we were trying to take advantage of that, and we did, and it worked very well. This was 1982. It's just a typical shot. This bridge, we were driving piles. On the left side, that's a lead for a pile driver, and the crane is controlling that, and then the other crane was feeding the piling up to the lead so they could drive the piles to make a foundation for the bridge. Fairly typical construction. Sometimes it was all the concrete footers and salt. This happened to be down Blackstone where there was not much rock, so they drove piles in the dirt to support the bridge. Anyway, I'll back up a little bit here and talk about my brother Jack. He went to VMI in 1948. I went to UVA in 1951. We were 3 years apart. And Jack got his degree at VMI, had to go in the Army for a year. I got my degree at UVA in 4 years and had to go in the Army. I mean, I had a commitment to go to the Air Force. I was in the Air Force ROTC, so I had an obligation when I graduated. I was a second lieutenant, but I had to go Jack had served his time in the Corps of Engineers when he got out. Dad was still living, and he went up to Fort Belvoir and served 2 years up there and ran the crane shovel school for them. My training, while Jack was gone, my dad passed away in October 1951, the year I graduated college. He passed away with cancer, and so that year he and I had bid a job in Rockbridge County, about 3 miles long, it was widening on the Carrs Creek Road, and we worked on that from July and August on through the end of November, and it was a road that was working under traffic, and we couldn't do the work in the wintertime because we couldn't keep the road open for traffic. So we shut the job down, and I was fortunate enough to get a job at White Sulphur Springs. It's not mine. We were fortunate enough to get a job over in White Sulphur Springs to Greenbrier Hotel. They were building a road from the hotel up to the Cates Mountain Lodge, or rebuilding a road. And Haley Chisholm Morris was a company we were familiar with and worked with all through World War II. They did a lot of work for the C&O, and when this job came up, because it was close to Clifton Forge where Haley Chisholm Morris was operating, they offered the job to them, and they didn't want it, but the president of the company called me and said, "Do you want to do a little job for the Greenbrier?" And I talked to him, what was it, and he told me. So I hustled on up there and looked at it. We gave them a price. They took it. We built the road, made a little money on it. The best thing that happened there was I met my wife, Elise. And we had not known each other as children, and a friend of hers in Covington had knew a friend of mine I'd gone to school with at UVA, and he was working at the paper mill in Covington, and they decided that I would be a good match for Elise, her friend in Covington and my friend. And it had a pretty hard time convincing us, but we finally agreed to a blind date, and it started a long time ago. And December this year, it'll be 65 years that we've. Thank you. It's mostly due to her. She's a very, very sweet, nice person. And so, after we finished the job at the Greenbrier, I had a obligation at the Air Force was to go to pilot training, and I had not fully decided exactly how I was going to handle that. I had to go whenever they found a slot for me. We had too many second lieutenants and not enough slots to train us in. But I got orders finally in the fall of 1956 to go on to San Antonio for flight ground school for the pre-flight training. I was down there for a couple months, and I had some minor operation, and they gave me a 30-day convalescent leave. And I called Elise, and I said, "I'm coming home, and we're getting married." And so I drove straight through from San Antonio to Roanoke, and by that time, she was working in Roanoke as an X-ray technician. And we got married the day after I got there. She got the blood test lined up, and I got the preacher lined up, and she and I and the preacher and the preacher's wife had a wedding ceremony. And it was a pretty nice event for us. It wasn't a big marriage ceremony that a lot of people have, but somehow it's worked out well for both of us. So when we went back to Texas and moved to Florida, Marianna, Florida, they had a Graham Air Base was located there. It was a contract flight school, and I went through 6 months of pilot training, finished primary flight training, and the class that I was in, the Air Force said, "You guys are getting out too soon. You're in for a total of 3 years, and we're not getting enough payback on all the money we're spending to pay you to train you to be pilots. So you're going to have to sign a 4-year contract if you want to continue from today." And so a lot of guys went ahead and signed it. They really wanted to be pilots, but I really wanted to get back to Virginia and help my brother build the company a little bit. So when I didn't sign the contract, they took me off of flight status, and then I requested a hardship release from the service, which I got that without too much trouble because they had a couple thousand lieutenants they didn't know what to do with. And it worked out pretty good. I stayed in the Air Force Reserve for 6 more years and retired as a captain after 7 years. But I didn't feel like I did a whole lot for the government, but I did serve a year. While I was, or before I left to go in the Air Force, Jack and I had bid a job down Patrick County called Squirrel Spur Road. It started at the Blue Ridge Parkway and went toward North Carolina, Rocky Mount Airy, North Carolina. And we worked on that job until I went into the Air Force that fall. I worked the summer with him down there and finished a job in Rockbridge County and one at Greenbrier. Well, when I left, the job was pretty close to finished, and Jack had picked up several new jobs while I was gone, but he was anxious for me to come back, and I was anxious to come back. And we had made the decision after I got back, and we started looking at how we were really going to survive as we went forward. We realized that we probably were needed to change from being a grading and excavating company to being a bridge building company. And that is going on too long here. I have to shut things down. I'll show you these. This is a series of pictures taken on a job we're working on today, but I'll move on along a little faster here so we don't spend the whole late evening rattled on too much. One of the things that I need to tell you about was that we in 1960, we had a chance to get some work with English Construction Company from Alta Vista. They've always been a large building company. Mr. English started that business in 1933, and in the 50s, they started doing some highway work, grading and excavating. And of course, they had bridge crews too, but they had some work in Lynchburg that had a lot of box culverts on it, and they didn't have anybody to put on the job. And they subcontracted the work to us, and they gave us a very good deal on that job. They paid for the materials that we had to use and the payroll cost. And when the month was up, they subtracted whatever they'd paid for us from whatever we had earned and gave the rest of us to us in a separate check. So it worked out. But that financing aid helped us get started in the concrete business in a pretty good way. And we worked with English pretty continuously, pretty much all through the years until we got to another point, which I'll tell you about. And that was the working with English was an interesting time. Doug Dalton was his son-in-law. He'd married his oldest daughter. And he worked at English too. And Doug and Jack and I got to be pretty good friends as well as Mr. English. And I think Mr. English liked us and had a lot of respect for us and knew we were working hard trying to get things done. So it happened along in 1983. I think it was 83 when Adams Construction Company came from, it was 85. Adams Construction Company had operated here in Roanoke since the 40s. And they had, Mr. Adams had died, and they had us 4 or 5 partners, and none of them were, and they were all fairly old, none of them wanted to take the responsibility of the company, and the company was put up for sale. And it wasn't a public sale. They were contacting different people, and they contacted Doug Dalton. And he was immediately interested. Doug was very aggressive and wanted to see his company grow, and it has grown tremendously under his and Mr. English's leadership. But anyway, Doug called Jack and said, "Are you guys interested in joining us and taking on this job, ownership of Adams Construction Company?" And Jack and I said, yes, we really are. And Doug had talked to his wife about it a little bit, and she was afraid that he was going to overload himself. But he'd been buying other companies, and she thought he had some heart problems, and she was just concerned about him. And when she told Mr. English that, he nixed the idea of joining in with us to buy. He didn't want to buy Adams at all. He didn't want Doug to have any more responsibility to deal with. But I'm going to read to you a few of the things that Doug said at Jack's funeral. My brother died in February 24th, 2020, just a little over a year ago. And Doug spoke at the funeral and said this: Adams was ready to sell, and we needed to move quickly, but did not have Mr. English's blessing. He knew nothing of our meeting and those conversations. I approached Mr. English on Monday morning, confessing that I had not dropped the idea for actually moving feverishly to find a way for Adams to deal to work, for the Adams deal to work. Would he give us one more chance? Just listen to Jack and Stan. He immediately and emphatically said no. And it was obvious this was disappointing in me. But I wasted no time in returning the conversation to Jack and Stan. I asked Mr. English to meet with them, relaying to them that Jack was asking for a personal favor. Mr. English said, okay, only for Jack. How quickly can you get them out here? We're going to put an end to this. He indicated this would be the end of it once he talked to Jack. But he didn't know that Jack and I were already there. They were in the office down at Alta Vista. So we immediately got in the room with Doug and Mr. English. And Jack expressed to Mr. English his desire. This is Doug talking again. Jack expressed to Mr. English his desire and his absolute commitment to be the leadership at Adams. Jack continued on to capture Mr. English's imagination, enabled him to see the new possibilities, to include a partnership and a working relationship with benefit not only for English, but for these good boys that Mr. English really trusted. Stan asked if the partnership could be 50-50, to which Mr. English said, certainly, and quickly turned back to Jack. He said, but you have to promise me that Doug cannot have anything to do with this deal. Those of you that know Doug know he made the promise, but he didn't keep it all together. But he didn't bother Jack much while he was running Adams. So anyway, but you have to promise me one thing, that Doug has nothing to do with it. As we were about to leave, Stan said to Mr. English that he hadn't really told us whether or not we had a deal, to which Mr. English replied, I can't imagine ever being able to say no to you fellas, which that the deal was done, and we bought it, and it was a good deal for us and a good deal for English, and Adams is still growing. They've got 20 asphalt plants, more than 20 in 2 states now. I think they had 6 when we bought them, so that's worked out very well. But in order for Lanford, Jack and I to buy our half interest, we had to borrow money, but we also had to find a way to get some more cash, and we did that by turning our company into an ESOP. Our corporation had been a C Corp, and there's a term. Let me get a drink here. How much longer we got? Worried about my time. In order for us to buy the interest, we had to raise money, and one of the ways we raised the money when we converted our corporation from a C Corp to a ESOP, an employee stock owned senior moment. Anyways, the company became employee owned. It took us about 20 years before we sold all the stock. We started out with, I think, 30% or 40%, and then increased a little bit each year. But by around 2000, we had sold the company was completely owned by the employees, and it remains that way today at Lanford Brothers. Another thing we had got from English was friendship of Bill Owens. Bill Owens was the vice president at English, and he was an early supporter of the Virginia Road Builders, and was served as a president, I think, in the late 60s, early 70s. And so he encouraged Jack and I both to get interested in the Virginia Road Builders Association. And Jack did, and then he did the good job, and I followed him. And in that sense, we were able to participate in trying to lobby for some of these things that we knew Virginia needed more money to build roads with. Let's see what we have here for slides. These pictures here were the latest job, or the current job we're working on down at Portsmouth, Virginia. It's a $5.4 million job, and it's we got 14 guys working there. I need your help here, partner. I've hit the wrong button here, it looks like. See if you can get rid of that picture there. Okay, there we go. All right. Thank you. All right, these pictures are taken at the job site in Portsmouth, actually just last week. And this service truck and this underneath the bridge, we're jacking the bridge up and replacing the bearings. The bearings had rusted and fouled, and replacing those. It's a different kind of work, and this is the crew of 14 people that are working on it. Like I say, it was a $5.4 million job, but it's slow work, and you have to do certain things at each stage to make it turn out right. And there, we talked about what it takes to make infrastructure, and of course that was what Buster was talking about at the beginning. It takes money to make things happen, and that's what working with ARTBA and VRTBA is all about. Jack was the first person to get involved with ARTBA after he was president of the Virginia Road Builders Association, and Jack had worked his way through the chairs to be president of the VRBA, Virginia Road Builders, in 1977. He was active in the American Road Builders Association and was elected president of the Contractors Division in 1981. He was also held the post of co-chairman of the Joint Committee of AASHTO, AGC, and ARTBA for over 5 years. AASHTO is the American Association of State Highway Transportation Officials. AGC was the Associated General Contractors, and ARTBA is the American Road Transportation Builders Association. And those are three national associations that work together to lobby a lot of the things that go through Congress. AASHTO basically represents the people that work for the Department of Transportations in the various states. The AGC represents building contractors as well as road contractors. American Road Builders contractors are primarily road builders. So, but Jack worked his way through them. He was elected chairman of ARTBA in 1991, and he received the ARTBA award for helping pass ICE-T, which was the Intermodal Surface Transportation Efficiency Act. He served many years chairing the road information program called TRIP, and Jack was a great role model for anyone in public service. I followed much the same path as Jack traveled. I followed Jack pretty much through the years, and by 1982, I was elected to the board of the Virginia Road Builders. Went through the chairs, treasurer, vice president, president of the VRTBA in 1988. I served as chair of an insurance committee for ARTBA in 1990-92. In 1995, I was elected chairman of the American Road and Transportation Builders Association Contractors Division and joined Jack on the AASHTO AGC ART Joint Committee that year. By 1997, I was working my way through the chairs to become chairman of ARTBA in 1999. Jack and I are the only two brothers that ever served as president of that organization since 1906, the founding year. I want to mention one more friend of ours that worked with a good bit over the years. One friend and fellow resident here, Jack Hodge, and I were at UVA Engineering School together, and happened that Jack was promoted to chief engineer at VDOT about the same year I made president of the VRTBA. We cooperated and worked together to improve relationships between VDOT and the Road Builders Association. This last picture shows Jack sitting on the new John Deere tractor. Going back to the end there. I'll come back to those others. Take me all the way to the end.
Oh, all the way?
Yeah, all the way to the end. That's where the tractor is.
You want to wrap up here?
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Let me interject. We're going to run short of time. But I'm going to quickly show you some of the pictures where Stan was involved in lobbying at a national level. I think they'll be of great interest. I don't want to take your...
No, go ahead. I've talked enough.
You were here at National Congress, is that right?
Yeah, I'm testifying before Congress there for the road. There was a road bill involved that they wanted some contractors to testify for, and I made my way up there. And this is Governor Gilmore is at a meeting, shaking hands. This is President George Bush. We had a party with him in 1999. Jack and I gave $100,000 in 1983, I think it was, to form a foundation to furnish education for kids of the people who were killed in highway workers who were killed or maimed in the line of work. So we've had 600 students have received over $600,000 in that fund, and it still has a pretty sizable balance in it. This was a year I was chairman. This is President Clinton. It was at a reception there, and I was in Maryland. We were up there. They were raising money. I think the entry price was $50,000 that night. ARTBA, of course, paid that. I didn't have that kind of money. But, this is George Bush Jr., and he's got his arm around my wife, but that was okay. And this is George Bush and Gilmore, Governor Gilmore, Elise and I in between them. This was taken in Las Vegas in 1999. We were at the annual ARTBA convention where Jack was there with us. Elise and I were taken over as president of the ARTBA for that year. And I was elected small business person of the year in Virginia based on some of these things. And Bob Goodlett is standing there talking to me. He's visiting our shop and office out near Hollins, Virginia. This was the picture I was talking about. This is Jack Hodge, who's still here with us. Unfortunately, he's had some memory problems, but he loved this tractor. And when he retired, friends at VDOT and then the contracting industry donated some money, so they gave him that as a going away present. And I wanted to be sure and mention that. Jack was really a good friend and one of the best chief engineers VDOT ever had. And that pretty much concludes what I had to say.
All right. Good.
Thank you.
Well, Stan may not say this about himself, but first you saw his career and involvement in our industry, and then you briefly saw his involvement for our industry at a national level. Very important, and I wish we had his elk up there today lobbying for transportation, and particularly for Virginia. So Stan, Elise, what a pair, what a good career. Thank you so much. That's it.